What kind of a game is Final Fantasy VII Remake? Is it even a remake? Is it some modern game so demented that it wears the skin of a 1990s title over itself, an attempt of a disguise? What Final Fantasy VII Remake happens to be is two different beings stuffed into a single form. It's the old and the new in ways good and bad. It's nostalgia, but it's also a look into the future. It's a dash of familiarity with hints towards new discoveries, but it's also two worlds that aren't supposed to be together. Aside from the clash of the 1990s and 2020s, there's also the realistic versus the fantastic. Final Fantasy XV ran into a lot of this too. Something just feels off about getting out of a knockoff Cadillac to go and fight monsters with magic swords. You get that same feeling seeing a regular train station, with normally dressed passengers aside from the three you control. Why does most of the world look like what you see out of your window, but then a man with a minigun for an arm and a guy with a sword bigger than his torso walk by? It's jarring, but can also be charming. Maybe the realism that's often present offers a way to ground the characters and make them feel more relatable than a group that has nothing in common with us. Whether this works successfully is something I teeter back and forth on. If a world like Harry Potter is an example of the most successful implementation of this, the worst is something like Sonic 06. And quite honestly, this game has moments of both. It's not always so bad that I wish the game was either entirely fantastical or entirely realistic, but most of the time seems to find a good balance. There's also bits of the 90s creeping into the game, but given how foreign the world is, there's not much that jumps out as being from a certain decade. The headbands that many characters love to wear are reminiscent of designs from that time, but given how futuristic the game is, that's about it. There's also some additions to make it seem like a game that was developed recently, like Heidegger calling the president on what's obviously meant to be a smartphone. It seems like 90s nostalgia is something the game should have tried to capitalize more on. It's not like Cloud is going to be stopping by Radio Shack on his way to defeating Shinra, but the menus and sounds could definitely take more aesthetic tips from PS1 titles, versus looking like every other current game. And besides, if Final Fantasy XV can have a blatant Cup Noodles commercial, then this one could have the gang munch down on some SpaghettiOs to refuel. But the best example of a beautiful fusion, one that the game nails so well, is the battle system. In any turn-based combat, you never feel like you're looking at the actual fight, just a representation of it. Think of it as reading a play-by-play of a football game, instead of actually watching it. You're getting all the same information, sure, but you're missing out on the real action, the moment-to-moment that makes it all so exciting. JRPGs like Xenoblade Chronicles have been attempting to solve this issue for a while, but it just doesn't hit right. You don't feel like you're the one making the moves, you're just waiting for meters to fill up. Final Fantasy VII Remake has meters, no doubt, and they act as a companion to the real-time combat. It's not as in-depth as something like Devil May Cry, but every action has some serious weight to it. You're the one making the attacks, with real impact, not just watching an animation play out. At long last, you get to see what a turn-based battle looks like through the character's eyes, and it delivers. It's basically impossible to make a combat system where you control three characters at once, but this game does a pretty good job of it. Being able to switch between them on the fly is always helpful, as is being able to bark out commands. You never feel like you have to yell at an AI partner because you're ultimately responsible for every action. If you lose a battle, there's no one to blame but yourself. Final Fantasy VII Remake lives up to the legacy of the original. Not a perfect game, but a worthwhile endeavor. Familiarity meets new twists and additions, and there's enough new experiences to give the title its own identity. Remake probably isn't the right word for it. A more fitting subtitle would be reconstruction.